I want to address the hateful acts that far too many communities in our country have continued to face this week. It's unacceptable to see a swastika painted in Downsview Park in Toronto. It's unacceptable to have hateful graffiti painted on a mosque in Edmonton. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have no place in our communities, and hatred and discrimination of any kind have no place in our country. This is something we'll never stand for, because the cost of turning a blind eye, it's much too high. Together, we must always denounce these unacceptable acts and support communities. That's exactly what our government will continue to do. It's been a difficult few weeks for many people across the country. People in London continue to grieve the loss of the Afzaal family. In Indigenous communities, this has been a time of mourning. As a country, we have to continue to work for justice and building a better Canada for everyone. At the beginning
of last week and the beginning of this week, I had very productive discussions with the G7, NATO, and the European Union. During these different summits in Europe with our allies, we made significant progress, whether it has to do with ending the pandemic or creating jobs for the middle class. Of course, every person who comes back from abroad must quarantine for 14 days, including myself, and so over the next week and a half, I'll be working in isolation here at Rideau Cottage.
I want to share some important updates about vaccine deliveries, supporting communities, and our plan to safely reopen. Let's start with news on vaccines. Canada is getting millions more Moderna doses brought forward from our summer shipment schedule into June, and we're locking in shipments for the first half of July. We've worked hard with Moderna to make this happen, and we're also getting extra doses from the U.S. Minister Anand will have the breakdown of the numbers later this morning, but here's the bottom line. Just like we surpassed our delivery numbers for the first quarter of this year, we're doing the same for the spring quarter. That'll mean for the end of June, as promised, we'll be at well over 50 million doses total. And by the end of July, we'll be over 68 million doses for Canadians.
Canada is getting millions more Moderna doses brought forward from our summer shipment schedule into June, and we're locking in shipments for the first half of July. And we've worked hard with Moderna to make this happen. And we're also getting extra doses from the U.S. Minister Anand will have the breakdown of the numbers later this morning. But here's the bottom line. Just like we surpassed our delivery numbers for the first quarter of the year, we're doing the same for the spring quarter. That will mean that for the end of June, as promised, we'll be at more than 50 million doses total. And by the end of July, we'll be over 68 million doses for Canadians.
I want to thank Minister Anand, her department, and our teams in Washington, D.C. and around the world who are working to get Canadians as many doses as quickly as possible. A big shout out as well to Minister Haidu and everyone at the Public Health Agency and the National Operations Centre for coordinating the rollout across the country. We'll have more details to share next week about shipment dates for the new Moderna doses. And of course, we'll provide that information to the provinces and territories right away so that they can plan to get those doses into arms as quickly as possible. Because that's what this is about, getting you your vaccine as soon as possible, getting it to your parents, friends, and neighbors, because every dose keeps someone safe, and every dose is a step closer to the end of this pandemic for Canadians.
Thanks to the arrival of such a large number of vaccines and to the fact that many Canadians are enthusiastically getting vaccinated, we are putting an end to this crisis in Canada. Almost 75% of admissible or eligible Canadians have already received their first dose. Together, we will defeat COVID-19. It's important to keep getting the first and second doses as quickly as possible. This is what will allow us to see those who we have missed so much throughout the lockdown and to restart our regular activities that we like so much.
No one and no community will be left behind. On that note, I want to give an update on support for Saskatchewan First Nation in Ontario. In the last few weeks, COVID-19 cases have risen very quickly in the community, mostly among children. At the end of May, we approved the deployment of the Canadian Rangers to help get the situation under control. Alongside the community, they've worked very hard to keep people safe. But even so, cases remain far too high. That's why we're approving additional support from the Canadian Armed Forces for Kashechewan First Nation. The Armed Forces will be in the community until at least the end of the month to help with everything from isolation sites to delivering food. On va continuer d'être là pour toutes les communautés.
We'll continue being there for all communities during this crisis and during the recovery. Yesterday evening, I talked about this with the premiers of the provinces and territories. As I told the premiers, my objective is to help Canadians during this crisis, to continue distributing vaccines and collaborate so that we can reopen responsibly. And on that topic, reopening, our government will have more to update you on next week around our plan that will allow people to start traveling again while ensuring the safety of all.
Finally, this morning, I want to address some recent developments in the House of Commons. The work we do in Parliament matters. And it matters because it affects you, your family, and your communities. In the House right now, we're working to extend support that millions of Canadians need to get through the final stretch of this pandemic, from the wage subsidy to small business loans to the sickness benefit. Let's be clear. These benefits will end in a few weeks if the Conservative Party and the opposition parties continue to obstruct our efforts to pass legislation. Frankly, I don't think anyone is surprised to see the Conservative Party standing in the way. But it's disappointing to see the NDP and the Bloc both join in these political games. This is progressive legislation and a progressive agenda that will help Canadians. There's important work to be done. And not only on supporting people through this crisis, we're also working to ban the unacceptable, discredited, and harmful practice of conversion therapy despite opposition by Conservative politicians. And we're working to reach net zero emissions by 2050. In other words, we're working on what matters to you. Unfortunately, not all parties in the House of Commons have the same priorities. Not all parties are focused on having your back. Instead of finding real solutions to real challenges Canadians face, the Conservative Party is playing political games. Just yesterday, they put forward a crass political attack on a man who has spent a lifetime serving his country as a police officer, as a decorated soldier who served 3 tours in Afghanistan and now serves as Minister of National Defense. I've been fortunate to know Harj for a long time. He's one of the most honest and hardworking people I've ever met. His entire career, and now as minister, he's been dedicated to transforming the culture of our military. He's working to combat sexual misconduct in the armed forces, including on expanding the Sexual Misconduct Response Center. And he will keep doing that work. We know there's still much more to be done to protect all of those who choose to serve their country, so it's unacceptable that Conservative politicians would choose to slander Minister Sajjan's reputation instead of working with us to keep Canadians in uniform safe. I said it's unacceptable. I didn't say it was surprising. While Aaron O'Toole
is engaging in petty, underhanded politics, we and our team are focusing on the real issues. We support all the members of the armed forces. We support you and your family, and we're working every day to build a better future for everyone. Thank you. I'll now be delighted to take your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now start with questions. Operator, over to you.
Thank you, merci. Please press *1 at this time to ask a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. La première question est de Christian Noël de Radio-Canada. La parole est à vous.
Question. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. You said not long ago that there won't be elections during a pandemic unless Parliament is dysfunctional. And what's happening at the end of this session? Well, would you qualify that as being dysfunctional? Answer. We're seeing the level of toxicity and political games that the opposition parties are engaging in, especially the Conservatives. But we are still working very hard to adopt the elements of our budget that will help citizens, to help move forward legislation on net zero carbon emissions, and to get rid of conversion therapy, which is a terrible practice. It's appalling. And we will continue to work on the important things for Canadians. And I know that Canadians are watching very closely what the opposition parties are doing so that we can deliver together what's most important. Follow-up question. Well, I see that you didn't quite answer my question. Would you qualify Parliament as dysfunctional? I'll give you a chance to answer that. Unfortunately, there was another subject, so if you could bring that all together, that'd be great. When you talk about vaccine certification for Canadians and permanent residents and soon travelers, what are the major obstacles with provinces that still need to be settled before putting that in place? Follow-up answer. Thank you, Christian. First, we will see if we manage to adopt those elements of legislation to help people. We made a promise from the outset that we would be there to support Canadians, and it's very unfortunate that the other parties don't seem to take those responsibilities seriously. But I still have hope that we'll be able to adopt the elements of the budget that will help people, and that we'll be able to adopt legislation on carbon neutrality. And I ask all other parties to do their part so that Parliament can continue to function. As for the vaccination certification, we are currently working on a solution for the medium and long term. So this would be something that would be easily recognized and standard for other countries so that Canadians can travel. And we are working in a very positive direction with the other premiers who wish to work with us to make sure that they're still keeping an eye on Canadians' data, but that they hand it over to the federal government so we can proceed with the national certification for travelers and people who want to go abroad. But in the meantime, we're working with the Arrive Can application, which is already well established and being used for Canadians and travelers coming to Canada under the current rules. This way, they can share a photo of their vaccination record to prove that they can cross the border, and this proves that they were vaccinated. This is not an ideal solution, but it is a solution that we'll be able to implement quickly so that people can at least have a few other options in their back pocket if they are fully vaccinated. And this will be a more long-term and there will be a more long-term and robust solution in the near future.
Thank you, sir. And I've had a reporter ask you to repeat that in English, please.
We are working on two tracks in terms of proof of vaccination for Canadians who wish to travel. First of all, in the initial phase, we're going to be working with the Arrive Can app in ways that people can upload an image of their paper proof of vaccination or online proof of vaccination so that the border agents on their return to Canada can verify indeed that they are fully vaccinated. That's something that we will have in place in the coming weeks so that people can have a few more options if they're fully vaccinated this summer. But for the fall, in the medium term, we are working with the provinces to establish a national certification of vaccination status that will be easily accepted around the world for people who need to travel internationally. And that will involve working together with the provinces, because the provinces, of course, have your health data and your vaccination status. And we want to make sure we're both protecting privacy and protecting jurisdictions, but getting a clear federal notification that other countries can see that we have that you've been fully vaccinated. So that's what we're working on for the medium term, but there is a solution for the coming weeks through the Arrive Can app.
Thank you. Next question, please, operator.
Thank you. The next question is from Ryan Timilty of the National Post. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit more why you chose to extend the border provisions for a full extra month, and why fully vaccinated travelers wouldn't be able to cross the land border more simply.
As we said, we are looking forward to getting back to normal as quickly as possible. But we're not out of this pandemic yet. We're still seeing cases across the country, and we want to get them down. At the same time, we also know we have to hit our targets of 75% vaccinated with the first dose, at least 20% vaccinated at the second dose, before we can start loosening things up. Because even a fully vaccinated individual can pass on COVID-19 to someone who is not vaccinated. And that means we have to really make sure that not only people who are fully vaccinated can travel, but that the communities to which they will return are not at risk, because even though they are protected from hospitalization, the people around them might not be. That's why we are sticking with our principle of doing everything necessary to keep Canadians first, keep Canadians safe first and foremost, even as we move forward on loosening restrictions in a responsible way. That's what I talked with the premiers about last night, and I can tell you there is a tremendous focus on making sure we're working together to do this as quickly and safely as possible, because we all want to get back to normal, which means, yes, moving quickly, but it also means avoiding any further massive waves.
Et en français, s'il vous plaît.
Repeated in French. We just had a discussion with premiers last night. It's important to highlight that we have set an objective at the federal level of 75% for the first doses. We're currently on our way to reaching that, and 20% for those with the second dose. We're not there yet, but we do expect to be there in the coming weeks, and that's great. And we encourage everybody to get vaccinated and get their second dose as quickly as possible. It's important to remember that even if an individual is protected from the worst possible consequences of COVID-19 with both doses, this does not mean that the person can't transmit COVID to someone else within their community or family, even if they got both doses. So it's not just a question of saying, great, you're protected, you've got 2 doses. It's a question of protecting the community that may not have second doses for everybody. So we're going to continue moving forward and relaxing the rules in a responsible way so that individuals who are fully vaccinated can travel, but we don't want them to be putting at risk other Canadians. It's always the balance that we're looking for. I know people are impatient, but nobody wants to see another wave of COVID-19.
Follow-up question, Ryan?
Yeah, sir, you mentioned the figure of 68 million vaccines by the end of July. By my quick math, that's enough to vaccinate all Canadians under the age of 12, over the age of 12. You frequently set September as the target when you expect all Canadians to be fully vaccinated. Given these new doses, given this number, do you expect that to happen sooner than September?
We certainly are very hopeful that everyone who wants to is going to be fully vaccinated before September. As you say, we have numbers of vaccines coming in by the millions in the coming weeks and into July. And that's great news, because the sooner the largest possible number of people get double vaccinated, the sooner we're going to be able to get back to more and more normality. And that's what we all want. So we're continuing to do our part in working hard to get doses in as quickly as possible, to bring doses that we've ordered for later in the summer and into the fall forward as we need to max out the vaccination process to get it as quick as possible. The provinces are continuing to step up their delivery of doses into arms across the country and are doing a great job. And all Canadians are doing their part by showing enthusiasm and positively and understanding that the more of us get 2 doses, the more we are protected individually, but the more also our community is protected, and therefore we can get into a better summer and a much better fall.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Thank you, merci. La question suivante est de Lina Dib de la presse canadienne. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Question. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to know where discussions are at with the Americans concerning the AstraZeneca vaccine. Some people received it once. And what about the second dose? With this vaccine, considering that the Americans don't want to recognize that vaccine, what will that mean for Canadians who want to travel? Answer. This is a question that was raised during discussions with the Americans. We recognized 4 different vaccines as being safe and efficient in Canada, but we know that other countries, including the U.S., have approved other vaccines that we haven't, or don't recognize ones that we have. And so there's going to be coordination and collaboration work that's necessary across the world to make sure that people who are vaccinated and protected, and who are protecting the community against COVID-19, can still travel. These are discussions that are ongoing. We will definitely make sure that people who got 2 or 1 AstraZeneca dose will not be disadvantaged when they want to travel. But these are discussions that will end in the next coming weeks so that people can start traveling. We're not quite there just yet.
And in English, please.
Yes, this is an issue that has come up, that different countries have different lists of approved vaccines. Canada has approved 4 vaccines as safe and effective, and we'll be recognizing those for travelers coming to Canada when the time comes, but certainly recognizing those as protecting Canadians. Other countries who haven't recognized the full suite of vaccines is an issue that we're going to have to deal with, hopefully in the coming weeks. We are engaged in discussions with Americans on that and with partners around the world to ensure that people who are protected from COVID-19 are able to travel. But we hope to be able to resolve those issues in the coming weeks in time for bringing in of loosened restrictions around travel.
Question. So if I understand, Mr. Trudeau, you still don't have any guarantees that you will be able to cross that border and go to the U.S. And can you also explain to me why we needed to go get 1 million doses of Moderna from the Americans, since we already have lots, and a lot of countries don't have any? Answer. First of all, there are a lot of questions being asked still concerning international travel, and different countries are studying the conditions. The United States haven't said yet what their criteria will be and how things will evolve in the weeks to come. We're working with them to get on the same page. But people who are fully vaccinated here in Canada, there are a lot of advantages regardless of the approved vaccine. Well, that is a priority for me. And as for the other question, my responsibility is to make sure that Canadians get vaccinated as quickly as possible. And as you've seen, we talked about 100 million doses that Canada is committing to sharing with the world. We will continue to do our part across the world, all while making sure that Canadians are getting vaccinated as quickly as possible.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from Tonda McCharles of the Toronto Star. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Yes, hi, Prime Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. As early as April last year, you stood outside Rideau Cottage and told the country that vaccines were going to be the way out of this, and yet here we are more than a year later, 6 months after vaccines have entered Canada. And so I'm very curious as to how do you explain to Canadians how it's possible that the government still does not have the ability to roll out a system of vaccine certification, and why you haven't addressed the scientific recommendation that was made 6 weeks ago to end the 3-day hotel quarantine?
Okay, first of all, Tonda, Canada is at the very top of the G20 in terms of numbers of Canadians who've been vaccinated with at least one dose. Our rollout of vaccines has been extraordinary, and I want to thank not just all the folks who've worked hard on signing the contracts, on delivering on those contracts into Canada so that we are in an enviable position from people around the world, but also all the frontline healthcare workers in the provinces across the country who've been delivering those vaccines by the millions into Canadians. And I have to also thank all the Canadians who have stepped up with enthusiasm to get themselves vaccinated, to protect themselves, but also to protect their loved ones. That is something that has been a tremendous success and certainly is something we're going to continue to make sure we push through to the end on and get everyone vaccinated by the end of the summer, hopefully, so that we can have a much better fall. In terms, what was the second part of your question, Tana?
Well, my question is not about vaccination. My question is about how is it this much later you don't have the ability to roll out the vaccination certificates to allow people to travel? How is it that you haven't lifted the hotel quarantine? So I'm just repeating my first question. That's not my follow-up.
Yes. Fair enough. We'll give you your full set of questions, Tonda. No, thank you. First of all, the certification is something that we have to work on with the provinces. The federal government doesn't have records of vaccinations of Canadians. In our country, we have a division of responsibilities in regards to the Constitution that allows the provinces to be deliverers of healthcare and keeps them in control of the healthcare system. So that is why we are working with the provinces on establishing a formalized certification of vaccine. But you will understand that the priority in the provinces and indeed across the country was rolling out vaccinations and controlling the spread of COVID-19. And that is what we have worked on. Now, as we get closer to reopening, we have a path towards people using their proof of vaccination that they have already received to be able to travel this summer, but we will have a more formalized process in line with what countries around the world are doing in order to keep people safe. And that, in terms of establishing international norms, in terms of making sure they're actually approved and usable in all the countries the Canadians want to travel to, will take a coordinated effort by the world, even if Canada is advancing faster than the rest of the world in terms of vaccination, as you know. And in regards to the government-approved accommodations, I think people need to understand what the principle and why that was brought in. It was brought in to ensure that the arrival test that someone takes is negative before they return home to their family to their 2-week quarantine. That's why we brought in that up to 3-day government-approved accommodation as a way of ensuring that anyone who was traveling had a negative result here in Canada before they're able to go off on their own to quarantine at home. So in many cases, those results have come back quickly and people haven't had to stay all 3 days. But we brought that in as a way of ensuring and reassuring Canadians that people traveling into the country are not a significant source of spread of COVID-19, and it has worked.
Follow-up, Tanda?
Thanks. My next question notwithstanding everything that you said about your Minister of Defense, why do you not replace him, given the lack of confidence that the House of Commons has expressed and many others outside the Commons and outside, in and outside the military have expressed?
I think it's unfortunate to see that opposition parties in the House have descended to a level of crass personal attacks that, quite frankly, is not what Canadians are looking for and looking at right now. I have worked with Harj for many years, and I know the level to which he is dedicated to transforming for the better the culture of the military in many ways. He's certainly not a part of the old boys club that is causing such problems right now in the military. And the work that he and so many other individuals and organizations are doing to make sure that every single woman and man who serves in the armed forces is properly supported, properly protected, given the resources when unacceptable acts happen, and given the supports necessary, but also end the culture that has tolerated harassment and misogyny for far too long, along with other types of discrimination in the armed forces. He continues to have my confidence. He is the right person for the job.
Thank you. Next question, operator.
Thank you, merci. La question suivante est de Boris Proulx, Le Devoir. La parole est à vous.
Question. Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Earlier, you talked about a possibly dysfunctional parliament. You mentioned the C30 and conversion therapy, carbon neutrality bill. About C10, have you abandoned the idea of getting it adopted by Wednesday? Answer. No, we still are hoping to move it along as much as possible. That's for C10. Unfortunately, the political games that are being played by the Conservatives around that bill are very dismaying. And we see that there's similar games are going to happen in the Senate. We're going to continue moving forward on it because we know to what extent artists are important and the world is changing. And we want to make sure that the rules that apply to our TV and radio stations for decades, we want to also find a way for people to operate in a new digital era. Netflix, Spotify, that's going to be very important. Unfortunately, the Conservatives once again are showing that they are completely indifferent to the arts and culture sector. And they're blocking this project for silly reasons, and we're going to do everything we can to move things forward. But there are limits to what we can do. We're in a minority situation, and the Conservatives really want to make things difficult for our artists across the country.
We know how important it is to make sure that the very same principles that have ensured that Canadian artists succeed by ensuring that radio stations and TV stations and networks across the country over the past decades have always been there to support and promote Canadian content. The world is changing. We need to make sure we find out ways of promoting and supporting Canadian content, and the artists and producers and workers in our cultural industries are successful in a world of Netflix and Spotify and online streaming services. That's what C10 is all about, and that's what we're very much focused on moving forward on. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party that has never been there to support creatives or artists or our cultural industries in this country is choosing to block and obfuscate and spread misinformation and disinformation. And unfortunately, we're seeing that it is likely to come from the Conservative Party in the Senate, where they still play partisan games, even though the rest of the Senate is working hard to be more independent. So we are hopeful that we're going to continue to be able to advance on this, but the level of partisanship and the low level of support for our artists from the Conservative Party is indeed of concern.
Suivi, Boris?
Follow-up question. You mentioned the dysfunctional parliament and the matter of elections. In your opinion, would it be wise or safe to hold elections before the border with the U.S. reopens or before the population reaches 75% for the second dose? Answer. Of course, as we said at the beginning, our priority is to be there to help Canadians, to send them necessary support, not just to be protected during this pandemic, but to make sure that we have a strong economy and an economic recovery that includes everybody. We have put forward proposals and bills, including our budget in 2021, that we're still working on to get it through the House of Commons, which will be there to help people. Of course, conditions are improving bit by bit across the country. We're getting closer to the 75% mark for first doses and 20% for second doses. We will be passing those throughout the summer. But the safety of Canadians will always be at the forefront of our reflections, and we will always find ways to help them every day during this recovery.
Thank you. Next question, please, operator.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mia Rapson of the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. So you are one of the 2 million Canadians who got a first dose of AstraZeneca, and we've had another change in guidance this week on what people should do now. It's saying preferred to get a different second dose of mRNA. A lot of people are angry again. I'm just wondering what you can say about what you plan to do. What you said a few weeks ago, your doctor had advised you to get a second dose of AstraZeneca, if that's changed for you, and what you say to Canadians who, again, are confused and a little bit alarmed that the guidance constantly changes and they're not sure what to do.
Every step of the way, the scientific guidance has evolved based on data that's coming in from Canadians, from studies around the world, so that we can make the very best choices to keep Canadians safe every step of the way. The one thing that has not changed is that all the vaccines approved in Canada are safe and effective against COVID-19. So anyone who got any of the vaccines approved in Canada did the right thing, because getting them early, as so many Canadians have, and getting them quickly has been part of the story that we're showing, where we're leading the world in terms of vaccination, and we're on our way to getting through and into a much better summer because of it. Like many Canadians, I am looking forward to my second dose, which I hope to get soon after coming out of quarantine in the next few weeks. But as to which dose, I will take whichever dose is offered to me. I will do what all Canadians should do, which is follow the best advice of the experts around them, including NACI and their family doctors. And I will be reassured, as all Canadians should be, that getting that second dose is the best way through this pandemic, not just for you, but for the people you love.
Follow up, Mia?
Yes. So you talked earlier about negotiations and discussions with the Americans in particular on getting vaccines that aren't authorized there to allow Canadians to travel. But what is Canada willing to do about Canadians or others who want to come into Canada who haven't been vaccinated with a vaccine that we have authorized? What are we going to do about looking at vaccines and allowing people in who aren't using one of the 4 vaccines we've authorized?
That's an excellent question, Mia, and it's certainly something that we will have to resolve before we reach that moment of reopening to foreign travelers and people coming into the country. I can assure you that our medical community and our experts are looking very carefully at that, including also looking at what the WHO approved vaccines are. And I think that may be a path forward for the world. But we will make sure that every step of the way we're doing what is protected for Canadians, what is going to keep us safe, not just from cases of the virus, but from future waves and other variants.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. Operator?
Yes, and our last question is now from David Aiken of Global News. Please go ahead.
Oh, thanks very much, Prime Minister. I guess one of the things I'm sure a lot of reporters have heard from are families in the United States and Hong Kong and the UK, where mom and dad are fully vaccinated with a Health Canada approved vaccine, but the kids are 7, 8, and they have not qualified for a vaccine program. Can you give us your thinking about, I know we want to let fully vaccinated Canadians come into the country without having to quarantine, but what about the families with kids who haven't qualified for a quarantine program? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question, David, and it's something that is posing a bit of a challenge because at this point there aren't vaccines that we're delivering that are approved for kids under 12. We're hoping that's going to change by the end of the summer, but we need to allow the researchers and doctors, the experts, to do their work to make sure we're keeping our kids safe. We know a couple of things about kids, and of course, the doctors who are speaking a little later can fill in more information on this. But my understanding and what we've seen is kids are at much lower risk of complications from COVID-19 and hospitalization, but they can still transmit and carry COVID-19, and therefore are a matter of concern when it comes to traveling and having kids come into Canada. We're looking at things, understanding that for parents to not have to do quarantine, but kids to have to quarantine for 2 weeks for 2 weeks might be difficult for the families. But every step of the way, we have and we need to continue to put the safety of Canadians first and prevent transmission or spread of COVID-19 and new variants. There may be something we're able to do around repeated testing and guidelines. There may be something we're able to do around other things. We're looking at all that because we recognize that is a gap that is concerning for many families. We will do the best we can based on the best advice, but our priority always needs to remain keeping Canadians and travelers safe.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Okay, thanks. And just sort of a follow-up on...
Answer in French. Answer repeated in French.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just let me answer in French. I hadn't heard Alex. It's
a very good question because there isn't a vaccine currently for children under 12 years of age, and vaccine manufacturers are currently doing trials to see how we can better protect children and to find out if vaccines are a good approach for children. We recognize that families with fully vaccinated parents who want to come to Canada and they will eventually not have to do a quarantine, they might be in a difficult situation if the children have to quarantine. So we're studying that reality. But at each step of the way, we must do everything necessary to ensure the safety of Canadians. And we have to avoid the spread of COVID-19. So we will continue working with the international community, with experts and our allies and doctors to overcome this challenge. And it is indeed a challenge, and we'll be dealing with it in the weeks to come, because even though children are at less risk of having complications, if they contract COVID-19, they can still transmit COVID-19 to more vulnerable individuals, and then they could suffer more serious consequences.
Thank you very much. Yes, so a lot of people are frustrated about the pace at which we're easing the restrictions on border travel, and I'm sure you're hearing that from your own caucus colleagues. In fact, yesterday, your caucus colleague Nate Erskine-Smith had this comment. I'm going to read it verbatim to a panel on tourism. And Nate said this. He said, quote, "We have an expectation that our representatives follow the science to impose public health restrictions on our behalf. We also ought to have an expectation that they follow the science in lifting those restrictions." End of quote. Now, as you know, your expert panel, Dr. Naylor, has said it's time to get rid of quarantine hotels. In fact, he said it a few weeks ago, and it is time to start easing some of the border restrictions. Nate is frustrated about this, and so I guess the question is, why now are you, the head of a government that says it's into evidence-based policy, ignoring the evidence and ignoring the advice of your scientists?
Thank you, David. The reality is we are actually following the advice of the range of experts that we talk to. And of course, as we've seen a number of times through the pandemic, there are different perspectives from different experts. But let me talk about the element that a lot of people overlook when it comes to fully vaccinated travelers. If you are fully vaccinated, we're going to allow for easing of restrictions and allow for more travel, because you yourself, as a fully vaccinated individual, are protected from the worst consequences of COVID-19, hospitalization, critical care, those sorts of things. That's what vaccination does. It doesn't, however, protect the community around you from catching COVID-19 from you. So when we look at permission to travel, yes, we're going to be easing restrictions around fully vaccinated travelers, but it matters also the level of protection and vaccination in the community to which they return. That's why it's not just about saying, okay, if you're fully vaccinated, have fun, go with it, run around. It's about saying that you're still returning to a country where we haven't yet reached high enough thresholds of second dose vaccinations. Now, we are getting there. We're getting there quickly. But that's why we're looking at a phased approach to easing border restrictions. Not because someone who's fully vaccinated today will be safer 3 months from now, but because the community they're in, the community they're returning to, will be better protected 3 months from now than they are today. That's why there is a progressive approach to a gradual approach to those restrictions, which I get it is frustrating for a whole bunch of people who just want to get back to normal. But it's really important that we continue, as we have from the very beginning, to keep Canadians safe. And if we are able to avoid more outbreaks like we've seen in some places across the country, even recently, by delaying a little bit more, by keeping people safe, so we're not seeing more people in hospitals and more people and more families losing loved ones, then that's the right decision. I get people's impatience, both in the tourism industry and individual Canadians who want to travel. But from the very beginning, we as a government have been there for Canadians, and that means doing what's necessary to keep them safe.
Thank you, and that concludes today's press conference.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada.